survivor and stepsister of Anne Frank will be in Nashville later this week. What an opportunity this is. News Channel 5's Kristen Scovere sat down with members of the Jewish community who say this event is special for everyone.
For 8 decades, silence protected her. But now, at 95, Eva Schloss, Annie Frank's posthumous stepsister and Auschwitz survivor, has broken that silence. Behind the fame of the Diary of Anne Frank, another story endured in shadow, one of survival, guilt, and a truth too painful to speak.
You are an Auschwitz survivor.
Correct, yes. And even more, I was liberated 75 years ago,
Yes.
which really saved my life.
What secret did Eva keep hidden for a lifetime? What did she find after liberation that still haunts her dreams? In this story, we uncover the real memories, the buried letters, and the revelation that Eva says she must share before I die. The girl who lived next door. Before the world remembered Anne Frank through the pages of her diary, there was another girl who shared her laughter, her street, and her dreams. Her name was Eva Geringer, and for a brief, golden moment in 1930s Amsterdam, the two girls were simply neighbors. They played on the same cobblestone square, rode their bicycles down the same tree-lined streets, and whispered secrets that only children understand. Anne was very lively, Eva would later recall, always talking, always dreaming of becoming famous. Neither of them could have imagined that fame would come through tragedy, and survival would come with unbearable silence. The Frank and Geringer families lived just doors apart in the Merwedeplein district, a neighborhood that seemed untouched by the chaos brewing across Europe. The girls were a month apart in age. Anne, born in June 1929, Eva in May of the same year, and though their personalities differed, they shared the same innocence. Anne was bold, mischievous, full of questions. Eva was quieter, a little more cautious, the observer rather than the performer. Yet both families shared the same heritage, the same fears, and the same growing unease about the Nazi banners that now fluttered across their homeland's borders. Eva's father, Erich Geringer, had seen the writing on the wall as early as 1938, when Austria was annexed by Nazi Germany. His family's elegant life in Vienna, filled with music, art, and evening walks, ended overnight. The Geringers fled with only a few belongings, making their way through Belgium and finally to the Netherlands, where Otto Frank, another refugee father, was also trying to keep his family safe. In Amsterdam, both men believed they had outrun danger. Both were wrong. For a while, Eva and Anne met often in the communal garden that connected their apartment blocks, playing marbles, trading stories, and whispering about schoolyard crushes. Children suspended between worlds, pretending life was normal. By 1940, the German army invaded the Netherlands, and the quiet streets turned heavy with boots and banners. Jewish families were marked with laws that stripped them of work, education, and dignity. Children like Eva and Anne were forced to leave school, and parks, cinemas, and even playgrounds became forbidden. The two girls, once free to roam, found their worlds shrinking to the four walls of their apartments. Still, friendship survived. Eva remembered seeing Anne waving across the courtyard, both girls smiling through the yellow Star of David sewn into their coats. "It was strange," Eva said, "to see your friends suddenly branded." But we didn't yet understand what it really meant. As persecution deepened, the Franks and Geringers made plans to hide. The Franks vanished into what would later be known as the Secret Annex, while Eva's family moved from one temporary refuge to another, trusting strangers and praying for safety. For the next 2 years, their lives ran in parallel, Anne pouring her fears into a diary, Eva moving from attic to barn to basement. And yet, through it all, the memory of Anne stayed with her. Decades later, Eva would recall their shared street, hopscotch games, and childhood dreams. That ordinary day, her 15th birthday, would soon bring a knock at the door that shattered innocence and changed everything. That knock wasn't just the sound of soldiers, it was the sound of innocence breaking, and the beginning of a truth Eva would carry for the rest of her life. Captured on her birthday. On May 11, 1944, the morning of her 15th birthday, Eva Geringer woke up in hiding, trying to feel normal in a world that no longer was. Her mother whispered a soft, happy birthday, but there were no candles, no gifts, only the faint creak of floorboards and the muffled quiet of fear. For 2 years, Eva and her family had lived like shadows, moving from one Dutch family to another, never staying long enough for neighbors to ask questions. The walls that had once protected them now felt like a fragile illusion. Every hour carried the same question: who will betray us next? That question was answered before the day was over. Around noon, a violent knock shattered the silence. Heavy boots thundered up the stairs, and German voices filled the air. "Aufmachen! Open up!" Eva's heart pounded as her father froze mid-step. There was no time to run. Within seconds, armed Gestapo officers burst through the door, dragging the family from their hiding place. Her mother cried out. Her brother Heinz tried to protect her, but there was nothing they could do. It happened so quickly, Eva later recalled. One moment, I was 15. The next, I was a prisoner. She barely had time to put on her shoes before being shoved into the back of a truck. The betrayal had come from a Dutch informant, one of many who sold Jewish families to the Nazis for money or safety. For the Geringers, it was the cruelest kind of treachery. They had trusted their neighbors. They had believed, like so many others, that goodness would prevail. Now, as the truck rattled through the streets of Amsterdam, Eva saw familiar landmarks: the canal, the park, the corner bakery, slide past like ghosts. It was the same city she had played in with Anne Frank, now a place of silence and fear. Outside, people walked freely, pretending not to see. Inside, Eva held her mother's hand, too afraid to cry. Their first stop was Westerbork, the transit camp in the Netherlands that served as a holding ground for Jews before deportation to the east. The family was stripped of their possessions, their names replaced by numbers. "We told ourselves this was temporary," Eva said. "We didn't yet understand where the trains led." But rumors spread quickly. People spoke of smoke, of camps with chimneys that burned day and night. Every day, lists of names were read aloud for transport. Families clung to each other, praying not to hear their own. That prayer failed for the Geringers. Within weeks, they were among those selected for labor duty in Poland, a lie that masked the horror to come. The journey to Auschwitz took 3 endless days in a sealed cattle car. There was no light, no air, no room to move. Dozens of people crammed together, fainting from heat and thirst. A bucket in the corner served as a toilet, the stench growing unbearable. Some whispered prayers, others simply gave up. Eva pressed against her mother, trying to breathe through her sleeve. "We were animals to them," she said, "but even animals are treated with more care." When the doors finally opened, it was night. The air was cold, the shouting relentless. Flames flickered in the distance, and the smell, thick, chemical, and burning, made her stomach turn. A soldier screamed orders. Eva stepped out, her feet sinking into mud, her childhood ending with every step. That day, her 15th birthday, marked the end of one life and the beginning of another, a life defined by survival. "I remember thinking," she said, "I can't die now. Not here. Not like this." In that single thought, she found the strength that would carry her through the unimaginable. But she would soon learn that surviving Auschwitz wasn't about courage. It was about enduring the loss of everything human, and somehow choosing to keep living anyway. The nightmare had only begun, and what awaited beyond the gates of Auschwitz would test every ounce of faith she had left. The number on her arm. The train doors slid open with a metallic shriek, and what awaited was not a station, but an abyss. Floodlights illuminated rows of barbed wire and men in gray uniforms barking orders. Dogs growled, prisoners stumbled, and the smell, thick with ash and chemicals, settled in Eva's throat like poison. "We didn't know where we were," she later said, "but the air told us." That night, the Geringer family arrived at Auschwitz-Birkenau. Soldiers shouted for men to one side, women to the other. It was the last time Eva saw her father and brother alive. "My father turned once and waved," she recalled. "That's the picture that never left me." At 15, Eva was thrust into a world where humanity had no place. The guards ordered the women to strip naked, their clothes thrown into piles that stretched across the mud. Hair was shaved off, jewelry confiscated, dignity erased. Then came the branding, the moment when people became property. A needle pierced her forearm, burning as blue ink etched a sequence into her flesh. 77,122. "It was fast," she said, "but it stayed forever. They didn't even look at your face. Only the number mattered. That number would replace her name, her history, her identity. It became her only proof of existence in a system built to erase her." Life inside Auschwitz was an endless struggle between body and will. The women's barracks were wooden boxes crammed with hundreds of prisoners, stacked 3 bunks high. Lice crawled across the planks. The stench of sickness clung to everything. A single piece of bread was divided among 8 people, and a cup of thin soup served as dinner. "We ate grass, potato peel, anything," Eva said. "Hunger became your shadow. Disease spread faster than whispers. Typhus, dysentery, fever. Death was constant, but no one screamed anymore. Fear had grown quiet, like the stillness before a storm. The worst part," she remembered, was waking up next to someone who hadn't survived the night. Each day began with the siren. Prisoners stumbled into formation before dawn, standing barefoot on frozen ground while guards counted them again and again. Hours later, they marched to labor, digging trenches, hauling bricks, building structures they would never see completed. Falling behind meant a beating. Falling twice meant a bullet. Eva learned to keep her head down, her eyes blank. But at night, she and her mother, Fritzi, whispered fragments of old life. Vienna's summer evenings, the sound of her brother's violin. "That's how we stayed alive," Eva said, "by remembering that we had once been people." Sometimes, even in hell, the smallest gesture could feel like salvation. A fellow prisoner, a Polish nurse, once pressed a stolen piece of cloth into Eva's hand, saying, "Hide this around your arm. It will make you look stronger during inspection." It was just a strip of fabric, but it saved her during the next selection. Dr. Josef Mengele, the camp's infamous angel of death, would walk down the line, pointing left or right with a flick of his wrist. Life or death decided in seconds. Eva avoided his gaze, clutching the fabric under her sleeve, praying he would not notice her shaking. Somehow, he didn't. "I don't believe in miracles," she would say later. But that day, I became one. At night, Eva traced her Auschwitz tattoo, reflecting on her lost childhood and thinking of Anne Frank, Another girl trapped in the same horrors, both surviving only as numbers. Decades later, she kept the tattoo as her passport to truth, a permanent reminder of her survival, and a promise to remember the millions whose lives were erased, turning a mark of suffering into a symbol of memory, witness, and defiance against forgetting. But the real test of survival was yet to come, when the angel of death himself would stand in her path and force her to confront the unimaginable choice between life and loss. The angel of death. It was a gray morning when the guards began shouting, "Austreten!" out of the barracks. The women knew what that meant. Selection day. The sound alone was enough to drain color from every face. Eva's mother squeezed her hand, whispering, "Don't look afraid." Fear was a scent in Auschwitz, and those who showed it were the first to vanish. That morning, hundreds of women were lined up outside, stripped naked in the freezing air. The mud clung to their feet, and the wind carried the smell of burning from the chimneys. The infamous Dr. Joseph Mengele stood before them, tall, pristine, almost handsome, his gloved hand resting lightly on a cane. To the unknowing eye, he looked civilized. To the prisoners, he was the angel of death. Mengele's selections were swift and cold. With a flick of his wrist, he pointed left for death, right for temporary life. No explanation, no hesitation. When Eva's turn came, she felt her heart stop. He barely glanced at her before moving his hand. Right. Relief rushed through her so suddenly she almost fell. But when her mother stepped forward, the doctor's hand shifted left. Eva screamed. Two guards grabbed her shoulders, holding her back. "Mama!" she cried. But her mother's eyes met hers with silent calm. "Be strong," Fritzi whispered as she was pushed away. "Live." That single word, live, became Eva's reason to keep breathing. She watched helplessly as her mother disappeared toward the line that led to the gas chambers. Hours later, after what felt like an eternity, a guard marched into the barracks. "New workers needed," he barked. The group returning from the selection line included Fritzi. Her face was pale, her eyes hollow, but she was alive. A clerical mix-up had spared her. Someone had pulled her name from the list at the last moment. Eva later called it a miracle with no explanation. She learned that in Auschwitz, life and death were separated by the thinnest thread, and even survival felt like guilt. "You didn't rejoice," she said. "You only whispered thank you to the dead for moving over and letting you stay." But Mengele's shadow never left her. She saw him often, observing prisoners, taking notes, choosing subjects for his experiments. He studied twins, dwarfs, and pregnant women as if they were specimens, not souls. He smiled as he took lives, Eva remembered. That was the most terrifying thing. Once she watched him select a set of twins, two little girls no older than 8. They held hands as they were led away. "They didn't cry," she said quietly. "They just looked back." In that moment, Eva understood that cruelty didn't always shout. Sometimes it smiled. Sometimes it wore gloves. Sometimes it hummed a tune while deciding who would live or die. Survival in Auschwitz became a daily test of endurance and humanity. Eva and her mother clung to small acts, sharing scraps of food, humming songs, carving notches in wood, to prove they still existed. Nights were spent watching chimneys, making silent promises to loved ones, and resisting through quiet endurance. As Dr. Mengele's selections continued and the war raged on, Hope grew with rumors of advancing forces. Slowly, the empire of death began to crumble, and the possibility of liberation edged closer. But when liberation finally came, Eva discovered that freedom carried its own torment, because escaping Auschwitz didn't mean leaving it behind. Liberation and the weight of silence. On January 27, 1945, the sound that echoed across Auschwitz was not gunfire. It was the quiet rumble of approaching tanks. The SS had fled days earlier, leaving behind chaos, corpses, and those too weak to march. Eva and her mother crouched inside a wooden barrack, unsure whether to hope or fear. "We thought maybe it was another trick," she would later recall. No one believed liberation could be real. When the first Soviet soldiers appeared, their faces hard with disbelief, no one cheered. The women stared in silence, their minds too numb to process the word free. They were no longer prisoners, but they were not yet alive either. The Red Army distributed food and medicine, but the smallest kindnesses brought pain. Starved bodies couldn't digest bread. Water made them sick. Eva remembered watching women devour handfuls of food only to collapse moments later. The soldiers did their best, but they too were shocked by what they found. "They gave us their rations," she said, "but they couldn't give us back what we'd lost." The smell of the camp, the memory of screams, the emptiness left by those who never returned. These things didn't vanish when the gates opened. Liberation came with its own cruelty. The realization that survival was not the same as salvation. Eva and her mother began their long journey home weeks later, crossing ravaged landscapes filled with ghost towns and abandoned trains. They traveled by foot, by wagon, by overcrowded transport cars filled with other survivors, many too ill to make it through the trip. "The road home felt longer than the road to Auschwitz," Eva said. "You carried the dead with you in your thoughts." When they finally reached Amsterdam, the city looked familiar but hollow. The canals were still there, the houses still lined in neat rows, but the life inside them had been erased. Jewish names had vanished from mailboxes. Friends' windows were dark. For the first time, Eva understood what survival truly meant. It was living among the echoes of those who hadn't. Homecoming offered no comfort. Their apartment was empty, stripped bare. The piano her brother had played was gone, the family photographs missing. Even the air seemed changed. At night, Eva would wake to the sound of footsteps and realize it was her own heartbeat. "We didn't speak," she said. "We didn't know how to speak anymore." The world expected gratitude, but Eva felt only guilt.
When I came back from the camp, I was full of hatred, especially when I heard that my father and my brother would not make it, would never come back.
Freedom. Why not her father, who had promised they'd meet again? The weight of that question pressed down harder than any camp guard's hand. She buried her memories deep, learning that silence could be its own survival instinct. After the war, Otto Frank, Anne's sole surviving parent, found Fritzi and Eva, bringing Anne's diary and forming a new, fragile family when he later married Fritzi. Though life outwardly resumed, Eva remained trapped by memory, hiding her tattoo and nightmares while trying to appear normal. For decades, she spoke little of the camps, sharing grief only with those who understood, until nearly 40 years later, she found the courage to tell the world her story. Liberation freed her body, but the camp never left her heart. Yet one day, in a small box of belongings long forgotten, Eva would discover something that shattered her silence. and reignited the promise she had made in the shadows of Auschwitz, to remember and to tell the truth before she died. The hidden letters. Decades passed before Eva Schloss finally dared to open the small chest that had sat untouched in her mother's attic. It was the 1980s, long after she had married, moved to London, and raised her own children, a life that, on the surface, looked whole. Yet something in her remained unfinished, a quiet restlessness that returned each year on the anniversary of her liberation. "I had promised myself I'd never look back," she said. But the past doesn't ask for permission. It waits. When her mother Fritzi died, Eva began sorting through her things. Faded photos, ration cards, scraps of fabric from a lost world. At the bottom of one wooden box, wrapped in yellowing paper, she found something she didn't know existed. A bundle of letters bound with string, the handwriting instantly recognizable. It was her brother's. The letters were addressed to their parents, written between 1943 and 1944, while Heinz had been in hiding before the family's capture. His handwriting was careful, artistic, the same style he used for his sketches. Each page was filled with quiet resilience. "Don't worry for me," one line read. "I am painting, and when I paint, I am free." Eva's hands trembled as she turned each page. There were drawings too, portraits of trees, boats, and sunrises, colors described in words since he had no paints left. In one final letter, Heinz had written something that would forever change her. "If you live, tell them we were more than victims. Tell them we dreamed." It was then that Eva realized her brother hadn't been writing for their parents. He had been writing for her. He must have known she was the one most likely to survive, and he left her a mission disguised as memory. The letters revealed a boy not broken by fear, but determined to preserve his humanity through art. He was 15 when he wrote those words, Eva later said. He knew what was coming, yet he wrote with light. His final sketch showed two figures holding hands under a rising sun. On the bottom, he had scrawled, "Even night remembers dawn." For the first time in 40 years, Eva wept without restraint. She said it felt like hearing his voice again.
This is only one volume of Anna's diary. Were there more than that?
There were 3 volumes of Anna's diary and about 330 pages Anna wrote.
For decades, she had envied Anne Frank's diary, the way it had given her a voice beyond death. Now Eva held her brother's voice in her hands, hidden all this time in her own home. It was as if the past had been waiting for her to be strong enough to listen. "I used to think only Anne left words behind," she said. "But my brother did too. The world just hadn't found them yet." The discovery forced her to confront the silence she had built around herself. She had told her story of survival, but never the story of her family's creativity, their humor, their dreams. The letters weren't about suffering, they were about living fully in the face of it. And that, Eva realized, was the truth she had to share before her time ran out. After the war, Eva began speaking publicly as a keeper of voices, sharing her brother Heinz's letters and sketches alongside memories of Anne to show that Holocaust victims were more than numbers. They were artists, thinkers, and dreamers. One mysterious final note from Heinz hinted at something hidden in their old hiding place, a mystery Eva never solved. The letters reshaped her mission to reclaim the beauty and humanity the Nazis tried to erase, even as she kept one secret from the world until the right time. Through those letters, Eva understood that survival was not just about living. It was about carrying forward the light of those who had been silenced. She realized Her voice could turn memory into a bridge between generations, a way to honor the lives that history tried to erase. And in sharing these truths, she found her own peace, finally letting the past speak through her. That revelation, the one she called the secret I kept for the dead, would not be about survival, but about what she discovered in the ashes of freedom. The truth she couldn't tell. In her final years, as the weight of age began to press gently against her memory, Eva Schloss agreed to one last recorded interview. Not about Anne Frank, not about Auschwitz, but about what she called the secret that would not let her sleep.
I think the first 15, 20 years, they really tried to, change their attitude.
She said everyone needs to know what people are capable of doing so we can try to change it.
Her voice was steady, but her eyes carried the depth of someone who had lived a century in silence. "I've told many things," she began softly, "but not everything." For decades, she had spoken of survival, of her family's courage, of the horrors she witnessed. Yet one piece of her story had remained locked away. Not because it was too painful, but because it challenged everything she had believed about hope, guilt, and remembrance. "This," she said, "is the part I couldn't tell." Not until now. After Auschwitz was liberated, Eva and her mother were placed in a nearby military outpost for recovery. Food was scarce, the wounded moaned through the night, and the line between the living and the dead blurred with each sunrise. One afternoon, Eva wandered into the edge of the camp, to a crumbling storage building filled with the personal belongings of those who had perished. Suitcases, shoes, books, and boxes of papers. She was searching for something to hold on to, something familiar, when she found a small pile of notebooks bound with a leather strap. The covers were torn, the ink faded, but on the inside of one, written in a delicate hand, was a name, a Frank. For a long moment, she froze. The air seemed to stop moving. "I couldn't breathe," she recalled. It was her handwriting, or so I believed. The same loops, the same slant. I thought, it can't be. She's gone. But maybe. She turned the first page, but before she could read more, a Soviet officer shouted, ordering her away from the area. The notebooks were collected and sent off with the thousands of other confiscated belongings to be catalogued. Eva never saw them again. It might not have been her, she admitted, but for that one heartbeat, I believed Anne had left behind something the world hadn't yet found. It was that moment, that faint, flickering hope that haunted her for the rest of her life. She never told Otto Frank. He had already lost so much, she explained. I couldn't give him another reason to wonder what might have been. Instead, she carried the secret quietly, returning to it in dreams, a vision of a girl's handwriting preserved in ash and paper. Whether the notebook was Anne's or not, Eva said, didn't matter. What mattered was what it symbolized. The voices still buried under the weight of history, stories still waiting to be unearthed. Anne's diary was not the only one, Eva said. There were hundreds, maybe thousands, that never saw the light. Every child had words. Every child had something to say. In her final confession, Eva Schloss revealed that her deepest truth wasn't about finding relics or lost pages, but about discovering herself through memory. She admitted that surviving Auschwitz carried a unique burden, the responsibility of speaking for those who could not. While Anne Frank's words were heard by the world, Eva spent decades in silence, carrying the weight of living with a story that belonged to more than just her. She realized that survival meant more than existing. It meant bearing witness, even when no one wanted to listen. In her final months, Eva distilled her message into a single powerful lesson. Truth doesn't die. It waits for someone brave enough to speak it. Through decades of talks and reflections, she emphasized that memory is both a warning and a bridge, connecting generations to the voices that might otherwise vanish. When she finally shared her secret, it was not about lost pages, but about the enduring power of remembrance, passing the torch to those willing to carry forward the stories that still linger in the shadows. Eva Schloss's story reminds us that remembering is not weakness, and silence is not safety. She gave voice to those whom history tried to bury, showing that survival is not just living, it is carrying forward truth, memory, and the lessons of the past. Her courage teaches us that every story matters, every life remembered, and that speaking out can turn pain into purpose. Like, comment, and share to honor her legacy. And click the next video on screen for more untold truths waiting to be heard.